And like you talked about a little bit earlier, like programming is something that was blowing up at the time that you moved to Houston, and so you get into that.
Right. So, I guess through my teenage years, sort of desktop publishing was sort of the new hot thing, and then all of a sudden the internet became real, right? And so it existed, I guess, before 1995, but it really became real in that second half of the 90s, where you could be gainfully employed building
technology,
websites, consulting, that sort of thing. And nearly everybody didn't want to get left behind there. They wanted, and being a young person, they thought, well, this guy looks like he knows something about the internet. Let's ask him. So I studied up a lot. I worked really, really hard. So I had a number of skills that I think were marketable at the time.
Sure.
And that all felt like, my friends and I would often talk about how we were digital pioneers.
Yeah.
And there was a certain sense of satisfaction that came from that, but eventually it was like, I think it sounds empty compared to what I think God's calling me to.
Yeah. Hi guys, and welcome back to Veils and Vocation. I'm super excited for the episode that I have for you guys today. We're going to be talking with Father John Brown. He is currently serving in New Orleans as the president of Jesuit High School. Father John Brown is a great man and a great father. He truly emulates what it means to hear the voice of the Father in our hearts and then respond with a resounding yes. Father John is going to talk about sort of the life before the priesthood when he was just John Brown, and how he sort of was on the cusp of the internet and computer programming and how he sort of entered into that. And then he realized, my Lord has not called me to this, and he's called me to something better, and there's a greater adventure that waits for me. He also breaks into St. Ignatius and that tradition and how the Jesuit order began, talking about the great fruits that have come from this order and that it has bared for him in his own life. I'm super excited for you guys to hear this episode. Thank you and enjoy. Welcome to Veils and Vocations. Today I'm here with Father Brown, president of Jesuit High School in New Orleans. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you all for having me. Appreciate
Absolutely.
I'm super excited to sit down and talk with you and discuss, the Ignatian tradition. And St. Ignatius is his feast day today, July 30th. What a gift it is to, sit down.
First.
The
31st is his feast.
The 31st. Oh,
you're a day early. You're a day early.
It's the vigil of the feast of St. Ignatius Loyola.
I would say my brief is lying to me. Cool. Well, the vigil of the feast of St. Ignatius. I'm super excited to dive into his story and the way that his story has impacted you joining his order.
Sure.
I guess let's start with, so Father, where are you from?
I'm originally from a place called Eunice, Louisiana. So it's a small little Cajun town in sort of right in the middle of the state of Louisiana, but really that means that it's in the south and the western part, right?
Yeah.
In the middle of the elbow.
Yeah.
Definitely. So you lived in Eunice your entire life?
Well, not yet, but I lived in Eunice up until I was 18. I left home when I was 18 and moved to Houston, Texas for a little while, and then joined the Jesuits 5 or 6 years later. In the year 2000 is whenever I joined the Jesuit novitiate, which is back in Grand Coteau, Louisiana, not that far from Eunice.
Okay.
It's near Lafayette, Church Point area.
Okay, cool.
That's where our novitiate is.
So I want to know, did you learn the secret recipes before you left?
Living by myself in Houston, I made a lot of phone calls to my mom and sisters to figure out how to cook. Yes. I did. I ended up learning how to cook. And, it's something I like to do. I love cooking Cajun food, but I had to learn that by living on my own for a little while.
Yeah. I have some friends that love to make the sauce with the smoked meat.
Sure.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite from your part of the South.
Sure. We're well known for crawfish etouffee is a big one. It's one of my favorite things to cook. And every different area has a different style of gumbo, so definitely we have our own style there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love crawfish etouffee. I think that if that was like one meal that you have to eat for the rest of your life, I'm definitely choosing crawfish etouffee. So.
And gumbo is my lunch for today.
There you go. Good for you.
You couldn't tell we're from Louisiana. Awesome. So I kind of want to start, with your childhood. What was the faith life in your house, at home with your family, and sort of was this something open to you, or how did that discovery
Yeah,
go?
well, I mean, I come from a real big farm family, so like we're 12 children, and I'm number 10 out of 12 kids in a kind of Cajun Catholic family, and I had faith from my grandparents down to kind of my generation for sure.
Yeah.
There was not a strong sense of, everybody needs to be a priest or a nun. Certainly there was not that, but there was definitely every Sunday morning everybody get up and go to mass. In your house you had pictures of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, Immaculate Heart of Mary, that sort of thing. So I think my worldview was definitely Catholic. By the time I got to high school, we were talking a little bit more with our friends who might not have been Catholic, and so there was sometimes it's kind of fun to debate Catholicism, versus other forms of Christianity, sort of thing. But for the most part, I was not thinking about the priesthood or anything like that until I was in my early 20s.
Gotcha. So growing up in Eunice, what was huge family? What was sort of growing up with that impact of, you don't have to do this, but it's something that's open to you?
Well, we had to do it. We definitely had to do the Catholic thing.
Or not so much
it wasn't.
Catholic
it didn't feel like I guess it didn't feel like there was an immense amount of pressure, or that's certainly not in terms of a vocation. There was not a pressure for a vocation. I didn't feel that at all.
Okay.
And I certainly didn't. I wasn't even considering it myself. But maybe when I was really little, I would see the priest and I kind of learned his prayers at mass and would sort of say them under my breath during mass when I was really small. But at some point, it lost its appeal, and I did not feel any vocation. Certainly, once I started dating girls, it didn't seem like this was going to be a thing for me, right? So I thought that was just a disqualifying thing. If you like girls, you can't be a priest. That must be how this works.
Yeah.
True. Not true, though. Cool. So you moved to Houston, right? Yeah, you get out of the house. What does that sort of move look like for you?
So it was at least it was a time of a lot of growth for myself, because all of a sudden I'm in charge of my own spiritual life. Right, at 18 years old, I'm in charge of if I'm going to go to mass or not. I'm in charge if I'm going to behave like a Christian or not. I'm going to be in charge if I'm going to deepen my spirituality. And I think as a grace from God, there was always at least a curiosity about the faith. And my friends all kind of noticed that, and they would always notice that I would defend the Catholic Church's teaching. Even if I wasn't living all that saintly a life, I was at least interested in the intellectual part of all of that, even through all of my 20s, until I really started feeling a vocation to do something more. But there was an emptiness that I couldn't ignore anymore when I was in my early 20s. That I think a lot of that came from. It felt like I was finding success in the job that I had, right? So I was building websites, designing websites, and it felt like for a guy my age, it felt like a very glamorous job. It was well paying. It had me flying back and forth to Denver every week for a job that I was on.
Oh, that was sweet.
Right. It felt awesome. It was great. But it also gave me just enough free time in those airports to sort of examine parts of my life that made me think, I should be asking God what I should be doing with my life. I hadn't done that before. It was like success at anything was an obvious sign that I should do more of it. And then all of a sudden my prayer said, well, maybe not. Maybe there's another way that God wants you to go. And so I began to pray to God and say, listen, I never asked you what I should be doing with my life. So Lord, if you want me I will go back to school and be a doctor. If you want me to, I will learn how to fly a helicopter and drop off bags of rice in poor countries. And then after several days of this, at some point I said, and Lord, I know that you don't want me to be a priest, but if you did, I would say yes. And that's when it just sort of sank. It sort of sank in. Well, I think God does want something else from me.
And around what age was this again, where you started?
24,
Okay, that's major for a 23-year-old to start that discernment journey, right? And it's not uncommon. I believe, that 23, 24 age is around the time, most people around that age frame are transitioning from college into the workplace. So now it's like, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to find success, right? But you took that time to submit yourself to the Lord and to seek out His way and His will. That's very admirable.
Well, it was definitely coming from a feeling of unhappiness, so I'd like to say.
And you said the void.
Yeah, I would like to say it was all nothing but light and happiness, but a lot of it was like, man, something's not right.
Yeah, something is missing.
Right. I was dating a girl who was just fantastic. I can't say a single bad thing about her. And yet something didn't feel like I should ask her to marry me. Something felt not quite right about that. And there was also an emptiness in the success that I was finding too, that it was like, I knew how much effort was going into watching the number in my bank account grow, and that just felt like that shouldn't be what I spend all my time thinking about, right? I should have more meaning in my life.
Yeah.
And so it was a feeling of emptiness. It was you hear people talk about a God-sized hole in your heart.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that was there. And most of the time I was making it to mass on Sundays. I'd go to confession once every couple months, but there was this other side of like, this is anemic. This is not enough.
Right. It's a deficit here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally went through that myself, when God was calling me higher in ministry, and I had to ask what direction you want me to go in, because at one point, to be transparent, I wanted to be a first lady. So I said I'll just sit pretty, next to my pastor husband and do the work of the Lord. But then God started showing me that, there's an evangelistic ministry inside of me, and showed me how to equip that to share the gospel.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that your discernment story is really cool because, right, you've been exposed, and like you talked about a little bit earlier, like programming is something that was blowing up at the time that you moved to Houston, and so you get into that.
Right. So, I guess through my teenage years, sort of desktop publishing was sort of the new hot thing, and then all of a sudden the internet became real, right? And so it existed, I guess, before 1995, but it really became real in that second half of the 90s, where you could be gainfully employed building
technology,
websites, consulting, that sort of thing. And nearly everybody didn't want to get left behind there. They wanted, and being a young person, they thought, well, this guy looks like he knows something about the internet. Let's ask him. So I studied up a lot. I worked really, really hard, and I had that farm boy mentality, which meant I was going to show up to work early. I was going to stay a little bit late. I was respectful of people. So I had a number of skills that I think were marketable at the time, and that all felt like. My friends and I would often talk about how we were digital pioneers.
Yeah.
And there was a certain sense of satisfaction that came from that, but eventually it was like, I think it sounds empty.
Yeah.
What I think God's calling me to.
Yeah. And I think that's really cool because especially in today's world, right, everyone is like, no, like, let's just keep building tech. Like, that's what life is like. Like, that's what I want to go for. And it's like, you live that and you just recognize it's okay. There's something way better.
For what it is, and if God's calling you to that should be the best thing in the world. You should feel like this is, of all the good choices there are in front of me, this is what God must be calling me to. If you can say that is a great feeling.
Right.
I just couldn't say that about myself.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I sort of want to get into you begin to discern the priesthood. Lord, I know you're not calling me to be a priest, but if you are, I'll do that. What is that sort of realization like as you start to realize, okay, I'm getting into this. Now I need to discern what type of priest I want to be. Do I want to be diocesan? Do I want to work for an order? Right, as you work for.
Well, because I was kind of caught off guard by the whole thing. I just stayed the same course of saying, well, Lord, if you want me to be this, I would do it. If you want me to be that, I would do it. So it was
open-minded.
Right, it was a radical openness to whatever God might call me to. I hesitate to use the word indifference because I definitely had some opinions, right? But I was ultimately indifferent enough to say, like, Lord, if you call me to do something that I have no idea what it's all about, I would still be willing to do it. And I think the Jesuits ended up being exactly that. So for example, I talked to Dominican priests and I thought, these guys are great. Everything they say seems true, but I didn't feel like God was calling me to that. When I talked to the diocesan priests that I knew, same thing, where it all seemed wonderful. But whenever I would learn about the Jesuits and St. Ignatius Loyola, I just felt like I was lit on fire for this sort of thing. Number one, you have the way that St. Ignatius systematizes a lot of the spiritual life. That had a big appeal to me just because maybe I'm a little bit, kind of scatterbrained when it comes to the spiritual life, and this systematizes it for me, right? This helps you kind of overcome those emotions that could be either good or bad. It helps you sort of place them in the right place.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. I also was just super impressed historically with the Jesuits. There were so many Jesuit martyrs, so many Jesuit saints, and a lot of these saints had been saints with a checkered past, right? Saints who, St. Ignatius Loyola himself did not live a very saintly life up until he did. And so I thought, if you can do that with those guys, maybe you can do something with me.
Absolutely,
I was looking to be transformed for sure.
Yeah.
I was also looking to be useful. and I knew that I had a certain skill set that I thought I could, put to, that would put to good use with God's help, and that the Jesuits, because they did so many different things, the Jesuits will find a place for me to be useful. And so I think that
you saw the possibilities.
That combination of things made it hard for me to resist what the Jesuits were offering.
Sure. So we hear often that God is in everything. So I would like to know from you, Father Brown, how can you describe that phrase, finding God in everything?
Yeah. The phrase, the way that it gets used often, they say, okay, finding God in all things means that almost anything I'm interested in must be good, right? And I think that might be a mistake. There are some things that we can get into that aren't good for us.
Yeah.
I know how St. Ignatius meant it, and the way he meant it was he was writing a letter to some Jesuits who were studying theology, right? And they had written a letter to him saying that, we'd really like to be in prayer 4 hours a day, and we're really having a hard time finding the time to be able to do that because of the demand of our classes. And St. Ignatius said, well, you can always pray a rosary between classes when you're walking from one class to the next. You can always be, you can find yourself praying in all sorts of moments of the day, and in that way you'll find God in all things.
Yes.
And so I think that's that judicious sense of when I can devote myself to God, and understanding too a priority that God may want at this stage in your life. Or, he may not want 4 hours of prayer out of you every day, right? That depending on the stage of life that you're in, you have to prioritize your day appropriately, right?
Right.
And so St. Ignatius was given that sort of advice. I still give the same advice today, that there's no part of your life that God wants you involved in that you can't find God in somehow.
Right, right. And that's so important that you said that, because as we began our journey of vocational discernment, or just discernment in general, we have to know that God is in everything, right? And we have to know how to invite him in everything. I recall a few years ago when I was trying to structure God in my everyday life and plug him in at certain times of the day, and it didn't work out sometimes because, life gets hectic sometimes, right? And we get off of course. And so I began to scale it down, if you will, but it was also a scale up, because I started to incorporate God in everything, in decision making, praying to him, inviting him into my meetings, inviting him to go before me. So it's very good that for us all to make sure that we invite God into our lives in every aspect, not just compartmentalize him.
That's right. One of my favorite aphorisms of St. Ignatius Loyola is when he says that we should work as if everything depends on us, and pray as if everything depends on God.
That's right.
So when we approach the world, it will keep us humble. It will keep us, recognizing that all good things come from God, and we're always in need of his grace. But it also means that, hey, God may have given you the grace to be able to go out and do what he's missioning you to do, right? So if you think about your vocation, that's really a way of describing your vocation, is what has God given me the ability to do for him, right? And so that's, God must be calling me to serve him in this way, because he's given me these skills, these talents, and maybe even these weak spots that make me stronger in other ways,
Yeah.
I want to talk about something that you said, because I think it's really important. You said God is not calling all of us to pray 4 hours a day, which he is definitely not, right? That's particular to some vocations and not others. And so does St. Ignatius talk about how do I discern what is my prayer? What should it be structured? How much? Because it's easy to think about prayer in quantity, and we're not supposed to, right? Think of I need to make this checklist and hit this number of prayer. But it's actually no, I need to stay away from that.
St. Ignatius Loyola speaks a lot about, he uses the word abnegation, right? So to abnegate would mean that you were to turn over something, right, to someone else. You were to remove your own will from something, right? You would turn something over. So, it comes from, if you think of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, who says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically he tells God the Father, I didn't wake up this morning wanting to be crucified, right? But your will be done. Your will be done. So when we live our lives with that sense that God is going to call the shots. So if let's say I decide on my own that I love to pray for 4 hours a day, and I think that it's great, and I would like to do that every single day of my life, but God's not calling me to be a monk, at some point you have to say, I've got to turn over my life to God and say, Lord, if you did not call me to be a monk, I
Yeah.
have to give up this idea that 4 hours of my day will be spent in prayer.
Mm-hmm.
I'll reduce it, let's say, to 3.5, right? Or something like that, right? But you
Yeah.
look at these different responsibilities.
Yeah.
At some point, let's say if you have children that need taken care of, let's say that you have a job that you know is what God is calling you to, and that job makes it impossible to spend 4 hours in prayer.
Yeah.
Well, then you just have to be satisfied with the vocation that God has given you. And
Right.
it's better to be someone with a little monk who's living inside, than a monk who's got something else living inside, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Is there any like tools that he sort of equips us with? I'm thinking like maybe the examine, but like other tools that we can use to sort of begin to discern like how, okay, right. So there's the discernment of my, capital V vocation, people talk about that a lot, but like, right, even like you said, like the little monk inside of like, okay, right, I'm called to this vocation, but I also enjoy like particular aspects of another vocation. How do I like go
Balance.
through that and balance that?
St. Ignatius Loyola gives us what he calls the rules of discernment of spirits, right? And they're not all rules. Some of them are just descriptions of things, right? But he calls them the rules for the discernment of spirits. He gives us 2 sets of these rules. One set is for someone who is struggling with getting their life in order, and the other is for someone who's already got it all figured out and is living a good, solid life that everyone says, man, that's a good person right there. They're living out their faith life. They're doing well. And that discernment of spirits is meant to help us see what are the influences in my life, right? And those influences, many of us, we're like, a boat with the sail raised and the wind is just blowing us wherever the wind wants to blow us. And St. Ignatius says we've got to know where those winds are coming from, right?
Mm-hmm.
And once we really have gotten our lives in order, where we know what temptations we face every day, we know where God might be calling us in these smaller ways. Once we get all that in order, then our true vocation becomes a lot more obvious to us, right? So if you would have asked me at 10 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would have said, man, I want to drive a monster truck. Just like, obviously I like that. And that's something, if I like it, that must be what I should do with my life.
Yeah.
But I think God obviously calls us to something else. And the step one is asking yourself, well, why do I want to drive a monster truck? Why do I want to do this thing over here?
Yeah.
And if you can figure out
The why.
those spirits, right, that are moving you one way or another, then you can begin to, once you discern that, you can begin to understand which spirits should I reject, or which feelings should I reject, which drives, motivations, even some things that might repulse me. Which of those things should I reject, and which of those things should I embrace and cultivate, right? And when you can do that, you start to see the world in a different way, much more clearly, and God's voice becomes much more clear for you. And so you can figure out your vocation that way, but really it comes after you've sort of domesticated your heart for God.
Yeah. But even like with all of that, how do I like get the clarity of like, okay, this is a spirit. Is it like, am I gonna like, I mean, I'm not expecting to just hear the voice from heaven tell me, reject these spirits, listen to these. So like, what is the way that I go ahead and discern which spirits or whether or not are good for me?
So the reason why there are 2 sets of rules here is because there are 2 kinds of people, right? One who is more sort of inching towards a problem, where their life is not going the way that it should, and they are not growing in faith, hope, and love. And then you have this other person who is already making all the right decisions and just really wants to figure out, of all of these good things that I'm attracted to, which is the most important, which one is God calling me to. That's what we would call the second set of rules for the second. That St. Ignatius calls them weeks, okay? So he understands the whole spiritual life to be able to be understood within a framework of 30 days.
Okay.
And so he has a 30-day retreat that brings somebody from terrible sinner to wonderful saint if you're doing it just right.
Okay.
And so in those 30 days, the spiritual exercises, right, there are weeks. The first week is one where you have to just face the reality of your sin, right? This is what you might call classically the purgative way. You have to purge yourself of all of these sins. You have to get to where you can not only name your sin, but you can say, I hate that I'm a sinner, and I'm even coming to hate the sin itself. I can see that sin no longer attracts me. In fact, it disgusts me. I've got to get away from those kind of things.
Okay.
The second week is one where you are looking at the life of Christ and examining, and hopefully with a new set of eyes, right? Once you've turned away sin, and then you turn to the Lord, and the Lord tells you, blessed are the poor. Those words mean something different once you've turned away from sin than when you're living a sinful lifestyle. and really having embraced and even incorporated certain sins into your life, right? And then the Lord says, blessed are the poor. You're not going to hear it the same way as once you've rejected all of the bad things in your life, right? So in a more mature way, you're able to hear those words. Then the third week is going to be one where you want to unite yourself to the sufferings of Christ, where you say, I don't want to just see Christ as my guru or see Christ as a great teacher, but he's one who says, come and follow me if you want to be perfect, which includes the cross, where you are making a sacrifice to God of your life. You're embracing the cross. And finally, that fourth week is to recognize that you're like the apostles. After the crucifixion and the resurrection, the ascension into heaven, Jesus sends out those apostles, and I see myself as someone being sent by the Lord out into my vocation. Right? So the rules for the discernment of spirits then are, he says that there's a big difference between those spirits for the first couple of weeks, because for the first week, the evil spirit wants us to be pleased by sin, right? So it's like, man, going out and having too much to drink at the club with all my friends seems like a good time to me, right? That seems like a lot of fun. And so the evil spirit's going to tempt you with that. The Lord, on the other hand, is going to want you to feel bad about having done that, right? Oh, man, you showed up late for work, a little hungover, and I feel bad about that. That's God speaking to you, right? That's God working on you. Once you're trying to draw near to Jesus, and that is what is attracting you, then all of a sudden the Lord can offer you things like peace, not just a disturbed spirit or guilt, right? That God begins to offer you peace and confidence in the way that you're living. And the evil spirit has to do the opposite. The evil spirit no longer wants to offer you all the pleasures of the world. The evil spirit at that point wants to make you feel like you can't be a saint. Who are you? You know, wants to give you doubts. You know, you can't do this. You're going to tire out, and everybody's going to laugh at you for having started this work. Don't even start. You know, and you're not the saint that everybody thinks you are, and all those sorts of feelings. Those are two very different approaches to discerning how you're feeling, right? Because it's really driven by, am I doing my very best to move towards the Lord, or am I doing my very best to embrace all the things of this world?
So what I hear you saying is within those 30 days, there's a week of repentance. Then you accept.
Could be longer than a week, depending on how much you need to repent.
Okay. So
just when I did the 30-day retreat, it was 12 days, 13 days. I had a lot to work on during that time. My week was long.
Well, Father, if I could be honest, every day is a day of repentance for me.
It should be.
Yes. So this is basically the way you guide people into discernment. Do you use the same, I guess, 30-day method in your school?
The elements, right? At least the elements of that 30-day retreat.
Okay.
Obviously, you can't ask everybody to take 30 days off, of being silent for 30 days. And some people you can. Right? Every Jesuit has to do this. Most priests of any order, or even diocesan priests, have done some sort of 30-day long silent retreat, right? And then the Jesuits, once you get long enough in formation, you'll end up doing it twice, right?
Okay.
So I did it my first year as a Jesuit, and then I did it in my 17th year as a Jesuit. We did another 30-day retreat as well. So the idea is not that it ever ends, right? But that it helps you sort of figure out where to file each moment of the day into which week of the spiritual exercises, and recognizing where it is that you need to see yourself and move forward from. So we teach this at Jesuit High School where I work. And I teach this with a new spiritual directee that I have. Sure.